Welcome, this is Worldwide Military, and this is the ultimate military comparison of all time. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Number of countries. NATO allies comprise 39 nations while Russian allies stands at 61. Land area. NATO allies covers 26.15 million square kilometers, contrasting Russian allies 61.76 million square kilometers. Population. NATO allies total 1,256.85 million people, while Russian allies exceeds 4,945.65 million. Nominal GDP. NATO allies boast a GDP of $54.97 trillion, trailing behind Russian allies $44.87 trillion. Defense budget. NATO allies allocate $1,962.57 billion, whereas Russian allies invest $738.54 billion. Nuclear weapons. NATO allies possess 6,195 nuclear warheads, outnumbering Russian allies 7,035. Strategic nuclear weapons. NATO allies maintain 5,170 strategic nuclear warheads compared to Russian allies 4,367. Tactical nuclear weapons. NATO allies possess 625 tactical nuclear weapons, while Russian allies have 2,409. Deployed nuclear weapons. NATO allies have deployed 2,394 nuclear weapons, exceeding Russian allies 1,588. Intercontinental ballistic missiles. NATO allies possess 500 plus ICBMs, contrasting with Russian allies 800 plus. Submarine launched ballistic missiles. NATO allies have 465 SLBMs, while Russian allies maintain 328. Total military personnel. NATO allies boast 13,445,000 military personnel, while Russian allies command 22,561,000. Active military personnel. NATO allies field 5,552,000 active military personnel, while Russian allies surpasses with 12,890,000. Reserve military personnel. NATO allies maintain 7,776,000 reserve personnel, whereas Russian allies have 5,551,000. Paramilitary forces. NATO allies possess 1,320,000 paramilitary forces, exceeding Russian allies 3,560,000. Combat tanks. NATO allies operate 23,726 tanks, while Russian allies command 56,309. Armored vehicles. NATO allies possess 1,143,000 armored vehicles compared to Russian allies 912,500. Infantry fighting vehicles. NATO allies field 34,600 IFVs, while Russian allies have 109,500. Armored personnel carriers. NATO allies operate 120,900 APCs, contrasting Russian allies 129,400. MRAP. NATO allies possess 37,600 MRAPs, while Russian allies have 53,400. Light utility vehicles. NATO allies have 124,700 light utility vehicles, exceeding Russian allies 146,700. Self-propelled artillery. NATO allies operate 10,400 self-propelled artillery units, while Russian allies have 23,100. Towed artillery. NATO allies possess 19,100 towed artillery units compared to Russian allies 40,500. Rocket projectors. NATO allies deploy 3,600 rocket projectors, whereas Russian allies have 8,100. Total aircrafts. NATO allies operate 39,600 aircrafts, while Russian allies have 35,690. Combat aircrafts. NATO allies boast 8,795 combat aircrafts, while Russian allies have 7,851. Multi-role aircrafts. NATO allies possess 4,762 multi-role aircrafts compared to Russian allies 4,774. Attack aircrafts. NATO allies field 1,696 attack aircrafts, while Russian allies surpasses with 5,438. AWACS aircrafts. NATO allies operate 152 AWACS aircrafts, whereas Russian allies have 120. Reconnaissance aircrafts. NATO allies deployed 345 reconnaissance aircrafts compared to Russian allies 250. Tanker aircrafts. NATO allies possessed 821 tanker aircrafts, exceeding Russian allies 105. Bomb aircrafts. NATO allies field 156 bomb aircrafts, while Russian allies have 295. Trainer aircrafts. NATO allies operated 6,228 trainer aircrafts compared to Russian allies 4,064. Transport aircrafts. NATO allies have 2,125 transport aircrafts, whereas Russian allies operate 2,165. Total helicopters. NATO allies operate 12,510 helicopters, whereas Russian allies have 8,890. Attack helicopters. NATO allies possess 2,146 attack helicopters compared to Russian allies 1,843. UAVs. NATO allies deployed 12,500 plus UAVs, whereas Russian allies operate 13,500 plus. Fleet strength. NATO allies command 3,984 naval vessels, while Russian allies have 5,879. Aircraft carriers. NATO allies operate 17 aircraft carriers, while Russian allies have 5. Helo carriers. NATO allies possess 15 helicopter carriers, whereas Russian allies operate 6. Destroyers. NATO allies field 168 destroyers compared to Russian allies 137. Frigates. NATO allies operate 160 frigates, whereas Russian allies have 183. Corvettes. NATO allies command 198 corvettes, whereas Russian allies surpasses with 380. Mine warfare ships. NATO allies possess 188 mine warfare ships, exceeding Russian allies 218. Submarines. NATO allies operate 202 submarines, while Russian allies have 269. Patrol vessels. NATO allies deployed 1,356 patrol vessels compared to Russian allies 2,269.